Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's guest is just an exquisite helper for the entrepreneurial world. He's an investment banker. His name's Devin Thorpe. He is a champion of social good. He's an author, a TV host, a convener. He is the CEO and founder of the Super Crowd, and he's also an advisor for several organizations. And he says, as a champion of social good, I've interviewed over 1,200 people, including Bill Gates and others who have devoted themselves to solving the world's biggest problems: climate change, poverty, and global health. Hundreds of times I've asked them, what is your superpower? I'm working now to share what I've learned. Well, hopefully you can share some of that today. Great to have you with us, Devin.
Well, thank you. It's so fun to be here, Zen. Thank you very much for the invitation. You've built, a great career and tradition and community around this, and I really am grateful for the opportunity to be here and be a little part of what you're doing.
Very grateful to you as well. Thank you. So what I begin to do in our conversations is look at a different side of life. You know, it's become apparent we live half inside and half outside. We're obsessed with the outer, and we do everything we can to control it in most cases, not recognizing the inner is the second half of that equation, and we're bereft of having conversations about it. And in the past, when we have, we've been deemed crazy, a lunatic. Sometimes we even get institutionalized because we're so out of the box and we just can't be comprehended. So we're changing that now. And with your help, we'll take another step towards that. So saying that, when did you first notice that there was something more to life internally than what you were experiencing externally?
I guess I tie this back to an experience I had as an 11-year-old. I was living in Salt Lake City in 1976 when the Teton Dam in southern Idaho failed. And so that dam failure was, I drive away to Rexburg, Idaho, where the most impact was felt. In that town, about 80% of the structures were damaged or destroyed. And of course, I was aware of that and had seen some of the reporting on the news and had seen the dam fail and the footage, and that was kind of cool to an 11-year-old.
Sure.
Then my father came to me one day that summer and said, listen, we're going with the church group up to Rexburg to help dig the muck and mud out of the basements up there. Do you want to come? And that sounded like a good time to me,
Yeah, our kid playing in the mud for sure.
Sure, yeah. So I thought that sounds great. So I said, yeah, I'd love to go. And I remember I was genuinely excited. In fact, we got on buses about 2 a.m. and I don't think I slept the whole way up. I was just so excited. I remember watching kind of every telephone pole go by the whole trip and was really excited. And we got there about dawn. We had some donuts and that sort of thing. And then we went to work and we worked all day into the evening. As soon as it got dark, we got back on the buses and came back. And I remember feeling like I had really made a difference. And, I have since, I've been back to Rexburg and I've looked and I can't find the statue that they erected in my honor. Certainly they did. I just can't find it. The reality is, I was probably more distracted by donuts and too small to really make a difference on a heavy lifting kind of project. But I was not self-aware enough as an 11-year-old to appreciate that I hadn't really helped much. But I was aware enough to recognize that helping other people felt different than the other things I did in my life, a lot different. And so I vowed a vow that I would never miss an opportunity to serve other people. Now, I certainly have, but it was a life-changing, life-defining kind of moment for me because it helped me see my responsibility to other people and the satisfaction I would get from that. So, yeah, that's kind of how I
It is a great way to
frame
put
that.
it. You know, it's far beyond anything you can do for yourself. Although doing self-love, right? It's important, it feels good.
Mhm.
However, when you are in that place where you can share it with others, it builds community and it demonstrates how tightly knit communities can be, especially in times of need,
Yeah,
chaos, even globally, that we step up and help. And it's just, it's our nature, is it not?
yeah, yeah. I think all of us have whatever we want to call it. I think of it as divine nature, but
Mhm.
others would describe it other ways. But a connection to the universe, whatever resonates with you in terms of the language. I think we all have a genuine connection to good, and I think our brains incorporate that, and you can actually see there. There's a little part of our brains that is connected to this idea of altruism, and
Right.
it's there for all of us.
And you can
I
see
think,
in the neurological
right?
world, you can see the difference in the levels of cortisol as compared to dopamine or serotonin.
Yeah, yeah, and so yes, you're right, and so I think there is, there is an important aspect, I think, in all of us that is tethered to that nature, good nature. And I think, as you talk about kind of the way our brains work a little bit, I,
Mhm.
I was recently read something that was really intriguing to me. It's popular. It's genuinely popular these days to talk about empathy. And
Yes.
yet, if we're genuinely holding empathy, what that means is we feel others' circumstances. And so often that would mean that we are feeling others' pain.
Hmm.
And this writer pointed out that that is good, kind of up to a point where if we're always feeling empathy for all of the suffering people in the world, we're just torturing ourselves. And she wrote that instead, that scientists can see that when we engage compassion, right, and we begin to see not just others' pain, but what we can do to assuage that pain, to
Hmm.
make it lessen, then we feel good, right? So in
Right.
the same act that we are feeling their pain,
Sure.
when we
And the
connect to
question is,
that,
how do we do that? Right. And
yeah,
what
fair
I've
point.
found, and this is something my dad told me when I was growing up, I was adopted and he was 32nd degree Mason, and I didn't appreciate that until later in life. And I became a D Malay in high school. Never went into the lodge to his disappointment, but I
Hmm.
got good training through D Malay. And what that showed me is that there is this sense of uh, what he said to me was, if you see something that needs to be done, that usually means you need to do it. So if you're looking around, if you enter life with that theme of what can I do to help? In any situation, you walk into a grocery store, you go into a meeting, you go into a business, wherever, when you have that attitude, you will see something that draws your
Yeah,
attention. And then it's up to you to do it or not.
yeah, yeah. That I think that is a profound insight, and I'm glad you point that out.
Me too.
There's a tendency for all of us to make excuses to why this problem is someone else's to solve, or we can't be bothered today. But the more often we take responsibility for addressing the problems we see, I think the happier we become and the better the world is, right? The more
Mhm,
quickly problems are solved
mhm.
if we're all taking some responsibility for addressing them.
Absolutely. And this brings up it in the not just the addressing, but the looking at it. And what we have a tendency to do is get angry at others because of their behavior. does that really make a difference? Because if you're angry, you're fighting, you're obsessing on your attention about it in that way, as opposed to what can I do about it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point. It's I feel like we all have an obligation to do something, but when we start thinking that focusing our energy on what others are doing instead of what we are doing, it does turn negative, right? It very quickly,
Mhm.
because we begin to say they're not doing it right.
Right.
There's a real tendency, there's a real tendency for us to think, even of people who are closely aligned with us in purpose and mission
Mhm.
and goals and objectives, to say, well, that person is 2 degrees off the path I'm on, so they're on the wrong path. They're doing it wrong, and it drives me nuts. Well,
Right.
you know, if you're bugged by someone who's on a different path by 1 or 2 degrees, can you imagine how you know much anger you would feel towards someone who's 90 degrees off the path, and the resentment you'd feel, and the negative energy that would
Mhm.
go into that? And it's hard, right? Social media and so much of our communications in the modern world uh, lock us into tribes, and we have tribal leaders that tell us how to think, like the recent resurrection of Jon Stewart on the Comedy Central, and is an example of that. We crave his guidance to tell us how to think about life, if he's the
Right.
one that you like, right? And there are others, right?
Sure.
And the real trick is to kind of do the opposite, to open our minds and to recognize that people that in some ways are diametrically opposed to us share more fundamental goals, objectives, passions, and human goodness
Mhm.
than they do in sort of the contravention. I was.
Absolutely. Yeah. But now you made mentioned, the disconnection you get from somebody that may be 2 degrees off of where you're headed, right? And yet they're part of your cohort,
Mhm.
working closely with them. And yet we can't step back a little bit from that and look at this divine tapestry. And if you're going the same direction, then you're going to have people that are 1 degree, 2 degree, because there's threads in it. They're not the same thread as you are. And because you're connected to that greater source of intelligence that's specific to you, and you really got nothing to say about the other guy or gal as long as they're tuning into it as well. And
Yeah.
so, how do we support that view and promote the collaboration that evolves from that place in recognizing, well, maybe we do have this divine source within us that is built into our system, which is a combination of, again, language, soul, frequency, and our genetic codes, right? And if there was some creator that was able to create all this and give us the power to create our own realities, which is what we're told we have, then why aren't we doing it a little better? Well,
Yeah.
this is our planetary evolution, it seems, right? Because civilizations take eons to develop to, a place where they can actually get along, let alone manage the planet's energy, or like a type 1 civilization, or a type 2 that manages the solar system, or a type 3 that manages galactic energy in order to maneuver and support life. So how do we, in your opinion, how would you approach that in the world that you are aware of, and or worlds, and have found at least some success in that
Well,
activity?
I think in a broad sense, I think we need to recognize how we align better
Mhm.
with everyone than we want to admit. If you think about the person that you most disagree with on the planet that you know or know of. And then you say to yourself, does that person want good food to eat every day? Does that person love his or her family? Does that person care, hope for a better world? And you have to say yes. And you say, well, like for me, the environment is a really important thing. I think that's an important thing for you. I don't think there's anyone on the planet that would say that isn't important. They would only say they may prioritize economic success more, right? But they would, at the margins, they would certainly say, well, yeah, I don't want the economy to make my life miserable with air I can't breathe, water I can't drink. I want those things too. And so I think there is much greater alignment
Mhm.
than we want to admit, even with the people who are most opposed to us. And then when you recognize that most of us are not at those extremes, but we're
Yeah, there is
somewhere
a
in the
bell
middle.
curve, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
Statistically
there's
speaking, and most of us are in the second, at least within the second deviation. It's what,
right. Yeah, yeah.
97.5% or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So we're much more aligned with the bulk of humanity than we sometimes acknowledge, and so there's an opportunity now from a practical standpoint. One of the things that I've really come to focus on is this idea of literally investing in other people that you can now do through regulation crowdfunding.
Mhm.
And I know you use some crowdfunding for your fundraising. And when I'm talking about crowdfunding here, I'm talking about the regulated investment crowdfunding, where you're literally giving people money with the promise that they will give you some money back at some point, sometimes contingent on things working out, but it's a genuine investment. No different than an investment in, Apple computer, right? You can go on the stock market and buy shares of Apple. Well, now you
Right.
can go
Well,
to,
there's part of that's B Corps, right? That
yeah,
came out of that. Now there's natural asset companies that have
yeah.
just been introduced within the last year or two.
Oh, cool.
Um, and those are available in the stock market. And there's this, it seems to be there's a shift from this is how I put it, the old agenda, which is profit over people and planet,
Hmm.
to the new agenda, which is people and planet over profit. It doesn't do away with profit. It just
Right.
shifts focus.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cool thing is with in the crowdfunding world, you have not only the opportunity to align your investments with your values, but to have direct impact, right? When you buy shares of, let's say, Tesla, let's say you want to support clean vehicles, so you buy shares of Tesla. Well, you're really giving the cash to BlackRock, right?
Mm.
BlackRock sells a few shares, you pick up a few shares, your cash goes to BlackRock. It doesn't help Tesla at all. But if you go to a crowdfunding site and invest in a company like Aptera, for instance, that's another electric vehicle company, and you put $1,000 into that one, well, the difference is Aptera is going to get the money, right? And they will use it to start building electric cars that are solar powered. And you say, oh, wow, that's a big difference compared to buying shares of Tesla from BlackRock, right? Because
Right.
when I buy Aptera shares, it actually helps the company do its mission, right? And if I support the mission, now I've aligned my investment with my values, but I've also had direct impact on the company by buying shares and giving them cash. So it's a fun world to play in, and
And the
it
fact that it's
harmonizes.
there
Yeah,
now
yeah,
where it wasn't before.
yeah.
So this gives indication that, yeah, maybe we got part of that memo that says, hey, you guys are capable, you just need to learn to get along.
Yeah, yeah. And so it is fun to see what's going on in this world. And I think this, there are so many different ways that we can manifest values or align our investing with our values, but we can support diverse entrepreneurs. It's
Mhm.
not easy. Right now there are about 500 companies in the country raising via crowdfunding. So you can go on, it's like a menu. You can just start to sort through all of the options, pick one that aligns with you. And so maybe you're wanting to support women, because women hardly get any venture capital. They get about 2% of venture capital. Say, oh, I'm gonna put some money behind women. Or you could say, I'm passionate about the planet. I'm gonna look for opportunities to invest in planet positive companies. Like one I profiled on my show recently is one called Garden for Wildlife, and it's a company that sells native plants for communities all around the country. Because if you go to Home Depot and you buy plants at Home Depot, they're going to sell you invasive species because they're selling the same things that are popular all around the country, whether or
Right.
not they belong there.
Right.
But if
Well,
you
that's
buy
how
native
in
species,
Arizona, I think we got, what do they call it? Buffalo grass.
uh,
Came from someplace else. And now it's everywhere.
yeah. And so when you uh, plant native species, it tends to be very positive for pollinators because they're looking for what is native to the
Mhm.
area.
What
And
you're talking about,
then it's for the whole ecosystem, right? Birds and everybody else
yeah,
flourish because you're planting native species. And it's just, one example of how you
and
can invest in planet positive things right now.
precisely. And in so doing, what you did was you just bridged the regenerative culture that is really having an upsurge, mainly in Europe right now. We haven't really been talking about it a whole lot in the States, but the idea is to be bioregion specific in how you deal with everything.
Yeah.
That just kind of makes sense. We've had these overextended governmental systems that try to weave their way into everything, hoping to make everybody happy. I mean, they don't
Yeah.
have an evil intent or a malevolent activity that they're engaged in. They're just trying to do the best they can with what they know and the resources they have. And we often find fault in them in the way it turns out. Well, by letting go of that federal or national activity, there are some like infrastructure, right? The roads and those kinds of things need to be in place, and that's probably a federal thing, administrated, not necessarily managed. However, like with Live and Let Live, where you talk about, bring it down to the lowest level, and even issue resolution processes, bring it down to the lowest level that's possible to resolve whatever issue is present. And that would go for resolving whatever issues are present environmentally as well.
Yeah.
And
I think
that
that's a
to
great
me
point.
is it's exciting to be on the leading edge of that, like we both are evidently, and have been for some time. In theory, you probably had much more results to date, because we're, with Planetary Citizens, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
Now, how
But
do you,
you're doing great work though. And I think recognizing that there's so many of us working in general alignment that I really prefer to see us celebrate one
Mhm.
another rather than critique one another. And sometimes on social media, I cringe when I see one climate activist criticizing another climate activist because they don't agree with some nuanced point they're making. And I think, man, alive, for crying out loud, we're all
Right.
in the same boat. Let's
Well,
celebrate the
there's too
effort,
many verticals, right? There's not enough horizontal.
Yeah.
All these silos that even in organizations, they're unaware of each other. And this is
Yeah.
one thing I hope to do with Planetary Citizens is begin to weave a network of contacts, organizations, people, so that we can begin to become aware of each other and be that much more effective. Heck, usually when there's a scientific discovery, it's happening with at least three around the planet simultaneously. I find that interesting. And so why not apply that awareness to something much larger? You do, who was it that said, in the entrepreneurial effort, you can create something big or small. It's the same amount of effort. It just depends on your vision.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Largely. largely. You know, I
Okay.
think there is a
Oh,
lot of
granted,
truth.
the
That first time,
complexity and
yeah,
all
yeah,
that gets involved
it's
as
a
well.
bit of an oversimplification, but if you think about the energy required to start any business, for instance, right?
Mhm.
It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of stress. And so you might be launching a food truck business that will generate $100,000 a year in revenue and create for you barely a subsistence living. It wouldn't be orders of magnitude more energy required to start a business that would be truly scalable to Apple size, right?
Mhm.
Now, it's harder, and you may not have the skill set to do that, and so therefore, and you may not enjoy doing that. So there are a lot of valid reasons to not do that and to go ahead and do a food truck. But the reality is, uh, you're right that it is not orders of magnitude different scale to do something large instead of something small.
Right. Well, the
It's a lot of work
orders
to
of
do something
magnitude.
small. Why don't you do something big instead?
That's my point exactly. And the philosophy that I've had once I left the corporate world back in the 80s is like, okay, so now what? I learned that putting my best foot forward is in the aerospace industry at the time. I was in charge originally, a machinist, and then I got into production control because of my attitude. And because of my attitude, I excelled on the desk that I was given, $7 million a month shipments and commercial spares and hardware. And then I was given the military spares desk because of that. It was 28% delinquent. The DoD had taken away a $1 million a month progress payment because of it. So since I was the young kid on the block and seemed to be having success, they gave it to me. And I brought it down under 10% in about a year. During that time, they kept questioning me, what are you doing? Well, what are you doing? And I'm looking around watching everybody else, 35-person department, 12 or 2,700 employees, 3 shifts.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw them beating people up emotionally to get what they wanted if they didn't get a good answer. Well, we had no authority. We just needed to get our jobs done. So I just used my, values I got as a kid. Help somebody get their job done and they can help you get yours. And so that's the attitude I had. Eventually, I suggested having interpersonal skills classes in a department. This was 1987 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that went over like a lead balloon. Following year, did the same thing. I was asked if I knew someone. I didn't. I said I did, as if you could find somebody. And it was that important, right? Because I
Yeah,
knew this was going to
right.
be beneficial. We call them emotional intelligence now. It's interpersonal skills then.
Right. Yeah.
And, then I found a consultant, brought him in. By that time, I was on the hardest desk in the department, which was actuators, and it was always having problems, and some of them that I just plain couldn't solve. And the 3 weeks after I got the consultant in and talked with the general supervisor and myself, I got demoted because I wasn't doing my job. And I didn't realize that corporate culture at that time, I thought it was because I wasn't performing on the desk. And it really wasn't. I rocked the boat. And I was too young to realize what corporate culture was and how stifling it can be in a command and
Yeah.
control setting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So left the company shortly thereafter, and a year and a half later, I ran into the purchasing department secretary, and she goes, "You'll never guess what just happened." They instituted interpersonal skills classes plant wide. So got the job done.
Yeah.
Didn't matter where I was at. My goal was to be the best I could be for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a profoundly important lesson, and I've been slowly learning and slowly incorporating that lesson, that life feedback into my own life. I struggled and still struggle, if I'm being
Of
honest,
course. And
with
however, that
the
old adage, go slow to go fast, that
yeah,
fits to a T, right?
yeah. But for a long time, I rejected some of the common sense applications of kindness. Not that I rejected kindness entirely, but I remember, for many years I was skeptical of the value of a smile and good manners, and part of
Discerning
that,
whether it was authentic or not.
yeah, and part of it was I get nervous that people would feel like they have done their fair share in the world by being polite and smiling and that sort of thing. And but slowly over time, I've
And
come to
feel entitled
appreciate,
because of it.
yeah, we wouldn't want people to feel like they're done because of that. But on the same, you know, the reality is I'm more and more convinced now than ever before that those interpersonal kindnesses matter a great deal in and of themselves. And even if someone's total social contribution is just being nice and polite to people, maybe they never give money to charity, maybe they never dig muck and mud out of a basement, if they're just nice and kind all the time, maybe that is enough,
Well, as long as you're
because the world
peaceful,
we
right?
need that, right?
Absolutely. And this is, kind of one of our premises with Live and Let Live Global Peace Movement is that you have the right to control. Mark, our founder says, you're the iron-fisted dictator of your life. And nobody has the right to tell you what to do with your body, your mind, your thoughts, your love, your property, your money, any of it. And we also have to give that same respect to others as long as they are living peacefully.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, I am a big fan of that, simple kindness now. I do hope that people will pair it with some of the harder forms of kindness. Sometimes, there is muck and mud that needs to be,
Well, sure.
shoveled out of a basement, and sometimes a nonprofit needs a donation, and sometimes we've got to lean into investing with an eye toward how we help other people and not just invest for our own wealth. And so I think I hope we can go beyond just being kind, but I do see, I'm more convinced than ever that just being kind and nice in our interactions with other people is truly an important thing.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about voluntary kindness for just a moment. And because some of us, we feel like that we're kind of being forced to contribute to something because of whatever pressures, right?
Mhm.
Then there's that idea, like, we talked a little bit earlier about the legal um, principle for live and let live and calibrating the law to remove all aggression. Well, that includes taxes because that's an aggression. Now, how would we supplant another system for doing what that's doing now in the ways of helping others in social services and things of that nature? What kind of voluntary kindness system would we need so that when that happens, there is no lapse in services?
Yeah, yeah. That's
That
a
does
good
that seem
question. And that's part of
plausible?
the reason why we have taxes, right? It's so hard to figure that one out.
Right. And well, yeah, you got to mandate something because most people have been selfish and self-centered,
Yeah.
right? They take care of me. That's first. And, we hear the term self-love and initially we go, well, we think they're narcissists. No, that's not what it's about. You got to love yourself first, because truly, before you can really ever love anyone else. And the reason that we're kind of together, our our soul desire, if you will, that could be SOL and that could be SOUL, um, is to love and be loved. And we don't seem to get that. You were talking earlier about, the same basic premises: food, clothing, housing, love. Is this something that you see beginning to surface more through the activities that you're in? And is the discussion of that word even more present today than it was a few years ago?
Yeah, one of the interesting aspects of the work that I engaged in is starting about nearly almost a decade ago. I began thinking about the implications of solving problems at scale
Mhm.
on a practical level, and I began to appreciate, uh, from my limited perspective, that if we make real progress on global health and real progress on equalizing economic prosperity by eliminating poverty and social injustices. And if we make real progress on addressing climate change and other environmental problems, that we would yield fairly naturally a more peaceful world.
Mhm.
And what I didn't appreciate is that at the same time, or maybe for a longer period of time, smarter people than I that work in the very um, academic and professional world of peace building
Hmm.
had come to a same conclusion. And they gave it a label, and that is positive peace, right? So when we are doing things like investing in diverse founders, when we are working on solving climate change and other environmental problems and global health, we are engaged in positive peace.
Mhm.
And the outcome is, right, as we reduce stresses in our world, in our communities, in our families, then we enhance peace in those communities, right? And so that's the idea. And I think it is exciting for me to see how the work that I do in advocating for impact investing contributes
Mhm.
to what ultimately is one of the big goals, right? Which is
Well, you
world
can't move
peace.
without money,
Yeah, yeah,
right? There's only so much that sweat equity and resources can do because you still got to put bread and food on the table,
yeah.
bills and
That's
all
right.
that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
right? We're in that kind of system. Now, speaking
that's
of
right.
that kind of system, and especially healthcare, what do we do? Because it seems like catastrophic things, but like somebody that needs a heart transplant and through no fault of their own, right? They get the heart transplant and they get a bill for $1.5 million.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And, uh, how do we handle that? Now they're saddled with this through, the goodwill of others, first of all, but then they get charged for it. That's not so voluntary. And then their lives are destroyed because it takes everything they've got to pay the bills and they can't. So
Yeah.
how do you have anything in your quiver of arrows that
Well,
is beginning to answer that
yeah,
question?
I'm not sure, that this solution resonates with everyone, but I think the British health system is the best. They, I'm not sure how literally true it is, but I saw one report about the British system that they have a cashier's window at the hospital. And the only reason they have the cashier's window is so that you can go there and get cash to pay for the parking out front. You don't pay for healthcare in the UK, right? Now, I think there is a parallel system that's sort of privatized American style there. If you want to have somehow better care, and there's some cosmetic things that you can pay for,
Mhm.
but your core health care is entirely free. You don't pay for it at all.
Russia's
And
the same way.
yeah, yeah, and
My wife's from Russia. She grew up in St.
yeah,
Petersburg, and some of the things that she's told me about their economy, how they take care of their people. There's no unsheltered people in Russia.
yeah. There
None.
didn't used to be. Now there are. I've been there
Okay,
recently.
well, and that's probably well, still, um,
Yeah,
the problem's been growing here for decades, and it's just now
yeah,
surfaced there.
yeah.
So
It's
there's
yeah.
something that
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. There are better ways, and it's tough to figure out how to make all of this work economically. One of the great pains, to implement the British system in the United States would literally mean nationalizing about 20 or 25% of the US economy. And I mean, it's unfathomable that we would actually do that. So then the question is, can we move in that direction? And what would that look like? And any move in that direction upsets some people. And so there are no easy answers to hard questions like this.
Do you think
There
there
are some
could
things, though,
be
that,
in the next, like decade where, like the advancements we had with AI and Chat GTP or GPT 3.4 or 3.5, now
yeah,
4.0, where it can actually go out and search the web and come back and
yeah,
instant answers that used to take days. So it's truncated activities tremendously and given us a lot of ability to inquire better, because the
yeah,
better questions we ask, the better information we got from, or we get from an intelligence far beyond our own collectively.
yeah.
Do you think that that may be a precursor to offering other alternatives, or maybe things that we haven't thought of yet that we know we need, that we just haven't found the right questions to ask yet in order to have it unfold in front of us?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, these are difficult questions, and we need to keep wrestling with them, right? And one of the key things, we've talked about on this call already is this idea that we have to be able to talk to people with whom we disagree in a respectful, collaborative way in order to begin to see the problems from another perspective, to be able to see solutions from another perspective. And it's hard.
Well, and we're programmed to run from conflict at any cost.
Yep, yep,
So what can we do to not just circumvent, but to transcend that kind of programming that we've received en masse, and begin to shift that to recognizing, oh, the doors, the fear, the conflict, those are doors that give us the opportunity to rise above and then
yeah,
step in ways that are effective, which we all know, navigating the holistic growth in some respects is part of being able to have mentoring as well as conflict resolution. Um, there's a couple other words that are evading me right now. However, I know you understand where I'm going with that.
yeah, yeah.
How do we encourage and engage and even inspire others to at least attempt that, and then give them the support to do so?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of principles that I find are relevant to this discussion. And one is the idea that once, personally, once I take a public position on something, my position hardens dramatically. And so, for instance, let's think about something silly. So let's say we live in a community, condo community, for instance, and the homeowners association is going to pick the carpet. If I don't take a position on what color the carpet should be when the new carpet arrives, I'm interested in the carpet, but not offended by it in all likelihood, because it's just carpet. Right?
Mhm.
But if I am asked what color the carpet should be, and I say it should be green, and they put yellow carpet in, I may be offended, right? I may be upset. I may say they did it wrong, right?
Right, because it
And
was
it's not
different than your
because
preference.
yeah, it has almost nothing to do with the facts and everything to do with the fact that I personally took a position and had it violated. And so there's a corollary to that that a friend of mine pointed out. Christian Harrison is his name. He's a nice guy, and he was explaining to me that there is this that
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 Kristen, you're
we're
talking about the guy
all
that left Google and started his own nonprofit?
no, it's not
Oh,
that guy,
different one. Okay.
but this guy he pointed out that everyone is willing to change their mind, but they just don't want to do it in public, right? They don't want to have
They
to
would have
be
permission.
right. You
Want
want to do it
permission to be able to change
quietly
their mind.
and on the side. So yeah, it's a weird kind of deal. I think a lot of the success around having successful conversations around hard topics is that they have to be, a lot of that work has to be done in private. And
Mhm.
it's going to be much more effective to talk quietly with someone in influence than it is to tweet at them and mock them on social media. That's never going to
Yeah.
change
Oh,
someone's
no,
mind,
and,
right?
you know as well as I do, in any organization of any size, the most important thing is communication.
Yeah,
And way, not just the what, it's the how.
yeah,
And what that brings to the table for open discussions, for creating those abilities to mediate and navigate through tough situations with both parties. Of course, thinking there's conflict because usually the two are just misunderstanding each other, and because they've got their own dictionary that they're listening and looking with
sure. Yeah, yeah,
to and from, and the other as well. So in that process, there's this Stephen Covey's, fifth insight among others is that, you get to know the other person first before trying to shove whatever you want down their throat, right? You
yeah,
want to navigate so that there's a collaborative communication and conversation as opposed to an adversarial one.
yeah. And from a tactical standpoint, that's really a key thing. But there's a deeper level on which it's more relevant too, and that is, if we're really being our best selves, we have to open up our own minds to new ideas. And we all think we're good at that, and most of us are
Until we
not
get confronted
really.
with something that makes us go, "Huh,
Yeah, yeah,
triggers."
yeah. And I love to think I'm open-minded until I take a position, and then and so yeah, I think we can all be better at being more open-minded, and I think we can also do better at recognizing
Sure.
that we still share in 2024, despite all the disagreements in our society, and it's not just in the United States, it's global, that I think our social media has just created tribes and divides and camps, and it's scary and dangerous, the implications of that. But I think the fact is, when we're talking to people that are in another tribe and have very different views on important matters, that oftentimes we share agreement on far more than we disagree on. And we've got to find better ways to focus our energy on building out from the points of agreement rather than focusing on the points of disagreement.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Now, how do we move beyond that initial mm, reticence to talk to our opposition?
Yeah, that's a really a great question. I am a pretty darn liberal guy. So I love folks like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They're heroes to me. AOC, these are folks I really love. And when I was living in Florida, we quickly befriended a couple down the street, and as we got to know them better, and we always loved them, still love them, consider them dear friends. But we learned that they were, avowed, ardent Trump supporting conservatives. And yet we had gotten to know them well enough before we sort of figured that out, that we learned what wonderful people they are, and maintain a close friendship to this day. And I think part of the magic there was that we found some of the things that we had in common before we found out the things that we didn't. And we were able to stay focused on those things we had in common and build on them
Isn't that what a
and
marriage is
maintain a
all
close
about,
person.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And so we don't, I have to admit, we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about politics,
Right.
but we have a great relationship, and I'm grateful for it. And I think if we can all work on it, I'm not good at that. That story is remarkable and one I share because it isn't necessarily my pattern, right? Because
Right.
I'm not
Right.
as good as I should be at
We're
looking
all faced
past
with,
those points of a disagreement.
and yet you want to be, and we're all
Yeah.
faced with the challenge to change. And one of the things that was funny, um, in my one of my degrees, one of the student or the study teams presented on a theme, and they used the phrase "challenge to change," and it's only three letters difference between challenge and change, the LLE. And they didn't have an acronym for it yet. And I just blurted out liabilities, limitations, and excuses. And those are all personal things that we have in order to, you become aware of those, usually
Hmm.
by just becoming aware of them. You eliminate them, they change. And so you have change automatically. So we took that theme, and almost 10 years later, I used it for an ASTD annual conference here in Arizona. And it sort of, it was the shift, challenge to change, removing liabilities, limitations, and excuses in the workplace. Of course, you're familiar with ASTD and their training development, the global um, influence. And now they're ATD, Association for Talent Development. So those kinds of things, planting seeds, the garden, right? You plant seed, you water it. What kind of water do you think that we need collectively to help those seeds of commonality grow?
Yeah. Great question. We've got to, sort of fertilize and water these ideas that are constructive to our healing. And I think it's important for all of us to keep consciously looking for um, the good in others and to
Mhm.
keep looking for opportunities to collaborate and share, to open our minds. But those are all hard concepts, all hard.
I wonder if they are really, or we just believe them to be, and because we believe it, it's now the truth, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah. There's some
which
truth to that for sure.
creates perception. And of course, they say perception is reality. Now, I heard something the
Hmm.
other day that made me really stop and think. Twice now this has happened. Once was in an interview with Dr. Irvin Laszlo, and we were talking about quantum physics. And I said, according we get 99% space and 1% material. And he says, I would say we are 100% energy. And of course, that was a wake up call for me. Well, the other one was in this uh, notion that, oh gosh, I went off on a tangent and I lost it. It was important. I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
So, how do you see it in this watering? We use metaphors and anecdotes and analogies and all this kind of stuff to make kind of cutesy it up because it's a discussion. Yet the hard facts are the willingness. Can we see it with a perspective? That's where I was going to. Was the perspective changes the perception? So can we, we're often too involved that we can't see, right? Like I own a business, you're
Hmm.
too busy working in it to work on it. So how do we step back and work on it?
Yeah. I think that's a great point, that exactly that um, tension exists, right? That we tend to go through our lives looking for ways to reinforce our worldviews, and that does make us more entrenched and more difficult. And it wouldn't take much for us to choose instead to look for opportunities to be a bit more open-minded, to reinforce opposite messages, right? That
Mhm.
that the truth is something we discover together,
Yeah, yeah.
collaboratively, working on things, and of course, it's a tried and true model in academia, largely, right? That
It's a model,
there's
it's theory. Now, how do we put
formal
it into practice?
processes for peer review and all of
Yeah.
that stuff with in science, and we can continue working on that kind of model in other ways too.
So, this reminds me of the 1 minute manager scenario, right? Praise, um, point out the difficulties, and then how you can improve, right? There's another one that friend of mine introduced me to. Oh gosh, it's been almost 40 years ago now, and he called it gift ideas. You sit in the center of your cohorts, friends, whatever, and you ask them to give you your worst, your best, and how you can improve. And the only thing you can say in response is thank you or please tell me more. Now you can
Mm.
imagine the angst and the inability of people not to defend themselves when they hear something they perceive as negative
Hmm.
from one of their cohorts, when in actuality, the whole thing's set up to be done in love and support of the one in the center. Because if they don't know how others are perceiving them, how can they possibly change? Now, of course, there you have the doesn't matter what people think, believe, or know about you, it's what you think about yourself. And then the flip side of that paradox is, well, it doesn't matter what you think about yourself, it matters what others think about you. So you
Yeah,
kind of caught in between that. How do you navigate something like that? Because I know you understand exactly what I'm talking about.
yeah. I think so. It's an interesting thing that I think there's a thing that you've probably seen in business that has been incorporated in recent years, this idea of a 360-degree review.
Mhm.
And I think the general pattern there is that people get more positive feedback than they expect. But it is scary, for a lot of us. Our natural insecurities begin to bubble up in that context. We're afraid of what people are going to say. And oftentimes we find that people are much more focused on the value we bring than the harm we bring and the
Mhm.
problems. And I think that's an important lesson to take away. But of course, all of us can improve in not only
We're all
at our
imperfect human
talents, right? But
beings striving to do our best with what we
yeah,
have, right?
yeah,
And so often we don't honor that with each other. Do you think that there's a root cause for that that we can, somehow see in ourselves and then help others see and alleviate in ourselves and then help others to do the same?
that's a great question. I think we're all kind of striving to figure out how to get through life, and we're all experiencing different things.
Hmm.
And so we have a sense, I think, that the world is a certain way. What we fail to appreciate is that other people's perception of how the world works are different, right? Their experiences have taught them different things. And uh, I've tried to understand my life in many ways in terms of how I've experienced it. And I look at how others experience it and I say, well, I can see that my experience is quite different than their experience. And I wonder how that frames how I behave. And it's interesting. In some ways, I can see the context easier than I can see the impact, right?
Hmm.
And certainly more easily than I can see, okay, well, how would I want to behave? If I thought the world worked differently, how would I change my behavior and those kinds of things? Those are difficult questions, right?
Sure. And
And,
yet
and so it's,
valuable ones that we need to ask of ourselves.
yeah, yeah,
How do we bring love to life better and show that we actually are committed to doing so. You
Yeah.
know, and in that, the operational capacity of it, addressing those fears and realizing that the fears, the failures, they're not failures, they're just ways to learn stuff so that you can get better. And
Yeah.
we tend to
Yeah.
beat ourselves up. You know, the back to the neuroscience, 70,000 thoughts a day, right? 2/3 of them or more, maybe even 3/4 of them are all self-deprecating. What if we were able just to slow down and think clearly, choose our thoughts rather than just letting our mind race, which is what another question I wanted to ask you. Do you think that we're just thinking too much instead of, like you said, sensing, right? There's,
Yeah.
and I was talking to Carl about this as well. You know, there's an ancient philosophy, indigenous, that we have three brains. The first brain's the gut because it feels everything. And now science is proving that there's as many neurosensors in the gut as there are in the brain. And
Mhm.
yet we're sense intuition, gut feeling. Gosh, where'd that come from? Then the heart, we decide it's kind of the Taoist thing. Is it desirable or undesirable? Then we bring it up to the cognitive capacity of what we can do with it, how we want to think about it. And one of the things that I found early on after my own spiritual awakening at 18, I started looking at things like, okay, where's the dissension come from? And the one thing that I focused on was the devil, right? Satan. It's supposed to be, all this. So I thought, okay, well, first place I'm going to go look is in the dictionary at the university. You know, those huge 2-volume versions. And
Yeah. Yeah.
what I was just dumbfounded by the result that I found. The very first entry stated that the word Satan came from the word Thetan. It's Greek, Thetan. It means thinker. So in my mind, immediately I thought, oh, those guys were so smart. They took a fictitious character, made a whole belief system out of it, put the fear of God into everybody as a result, and manipulated them into doing whatever they could without sharing with them that they all have that direct connect to their creator, their source, their infinite
Yeah.
intelligence designed specifically for them. So now we have that choice of being aware of it, right now that we are. What do? Do we get angry because we've been so programmed from the past? Or do we harvest the past and realize all the good things that we got out of that and move forward with a better attitude, realizing that we are in charge and that there is no malevolent force? It's all our choice as to what and how we participate in life.
Yeah, I think there's really, I think, an important point you're making there, and it's been so good to be with you on the show today. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to chat. But I do think, you know, that good prevails. That is, I think, it was Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice is long, but it bends toward justice, or I can't remember what he said.
Right.
But that principle, I think, is true. That we are all imbued with what I would call divine nature, and we live in a world, I think, that where good will prevail, and we can be optimistic about that and move toward actions based on those principles.
Absolutely. Yeah. In closing, and I know we've had a great conversation. I really appreciate it, especially from the realm that you come from, to be able to talk about that eloquently and also go into that inner dimension of it, and how we look at how we deal with money and the ways we can do that. Now, as a parting gift and noting the sense and the intuition and those kinds of things that are available, what might you offer as advice for someone on a daily basis to kind of look at what's going on uh, and find something in it for them?
Yeah, I think the key thing I would take away from the conversation is this theme that I think you and I agree on, that um, there is good in the world, right? And
Mm.
and that good is the ultimate outcome, right? That's the direction we're headed in. And we have different views and perspectives on how we get there, but if we start from the perspective that the world is not going to hell in a handbasket, but that the world is headed in the opposite direction, and that we can contribute to that good and be part of the good, I think that can reshape our lives in a really positive way.
Mm, totally agree. And thank you so much, Devin. This has just been an amazing conversation, and I'm sure our audience will benefit from it. I know I have. I've learned some
Thank
things
you.
from you, as I hope you have from me, and that's what it's about, right?
Yeah.
Creating these open conversations, just getting to know people and sharing that with the world. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. You're a great host. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks. I'm honored. And thank you. And namaste and in la catch. And thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and I'll see you next time.